My boss thought he could control every second of my day, even when I wasn't moving. He watched me through trackers, denied me pay, and screamed at me over a soda can. So I smiled and made one phone call that burned his whole company to the ground. If you've ever been underestimated, overworked, or treated like you don't matter, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear that karma isn't just real, it's ruthless. Let's dive in. It started with quiet desperation. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, no tears, no screaming into the void. Just the slow, creeping kind that settles into your bones and makes every day feel like a rerun of survival. That was my life when I first met Rick Ballard. The job came at the right time, or so I thought. After leaving my auto body shop job due to worsening asthma from paint fumes, I needed something that kept food on the table but didn't choke the life out of me. Towing seemed like a solid fit. I had the skills. The pay was decent. The truck smelled like gasoline and coffee instead of chemicals, and that was a win in my book. But from day one, I noticed the way Rick ran his business was different. He had a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and a tone that made every compliment feel like a setup. "You're sharp, Maddie," he told me my first week, "but remember, around here we play by my rules." He said it half-jokingly, but the glint in his eye was cold steel. Rick didn't just assign routes. He assigned parking spots. Yes, parking spots. Every driver had to sit in a designated area, usually some half-empty lot near the freeway or tucked behind a gas station. He claimed it was for optimal response time, but the truth was simpler: he liked control. And he used those truck GPS trackers like a leash. If you idled with the AC on during summer, you got a text. If you stayed parked too long on a winter night with the heat running, he'd call you, angry, condescending, maybe even yelling. Truck 11, he once barked at me over the phone, "What part of don't burn fuel unless you're towing did you not understand?" That truck? It was me. And I was freezing, wrapped in a cheap hoodie, engine running just enough to keep my toes from going numb. But that didn't matter to Rick. Comfort was a luxury, and according to him, I hadn't earned it. For the first few months, I took it. I told myself it was better than coughing up blood at a paint booth or chasing down child support from a man who vanished. I had a teenage daughter, Alina, and every paycheck meant groceries, rent, school shoes. But something shifted the day I looked at my bank balance after a grueling week, 14-hour days, missed lunches, not a single tow that Monday. I was making less than minimum wage, and that gnawed at something inside me. So I started researching. Every night after Alina went to sleep, I cracked open my laptop and started digging into state labor laws. I wasn't looking for a fight, I was looking for answers. What I found was a goldmine. The legal term was engaged to wait. If your boss requires you to stay in one place, at the ready, unable to pursue other work or personal errands, you're on the clock. That means hourly wages, not just commissions. If you're free to roam and choose your location, that's different. That's waiting to be engaged. Guess which one applied to us? I started tracking everything. Not for revenge, not yet. Just in case. Every time Rick told me to park at Lot C or near exit 94, I wrote it down. Every minute I waited without a call, I logged it. Every passive-aggressive text, every cold reprimand, I saved them all. Then Rick started to unravel. He grew pettier. More volatile. Like the power was slipping and he was gripping tighter. One day he lost it because I left a Diet Coke can in the cup holder. I was rushing to help a stranded mom and forgot to toss it. He screamed at me in the lot like I had stolen his truck and crashed it. Spit flying, eyes bulging, calling me careless, lazy, disrespectful. That was the moment I knew I wasn't going to be here much longer. Not as a victim, anyway. The next few weeks, I kept my head down. Smiled at his fake jokes. Took the shifts he gave me. But behind the scenes, I tightened the screws. More records. More screenshots. Labor board phone number saved in my phone. I even found a new job, another company, smaller, but run by people who treated you like a human being instead of a widget in a machine. I accepted the offer and picked my last day. Then I made a quiet little plan. I'd give Rick one last chance. A formal conversation. One adult to another. If he paid me what the law said he owed me, I'd walk away quietly. But I already knew what he'd say. Men like Rick don't pay people like me. They expect you to accept crumbs and say thank you. The night before our meeting, I tucked Alina in, kissed her forehead, and said a silent promise to myself, no more letting people like him win. The next morning, I walked into his office calm, composed, with my folder in hand. His secretary looked up, startled, probably wondering why the tired single mom from Truck 11 looked like she was about to take a deposition. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I was done waiting. Rick's office always had a strange smell, like burnt coffee mixed with old leather and cheap anger. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, feeling the cool hum of the air conditioner, which he only seemed to run for himself. There he was, lounging behind his oversized desk, leaning back in his cracked leather chair like a king expecting tribute. He barely looked up from his phone. "Maddie," he said, dragging my name like it was something sticky on the bottom of his boot. "What's this about? Something wrong with your final check?" I sat down. "Actually, yes." His eyes flicked up. I watched the flicker of annoyance cross his face, the shift in posture, the silent assessment of whether I was about to cry, beg, or grovel. But I did none of those things. I slid the folder across the desk. It was neat. Labeled. Dated. Everything from week 4 to week 22. "I'm entitled to back pay," I said. "You required me to park in specific locations, remain in the truck, wait for calls, and not pursue other activity. That's engaged to wait. Under state law, that's hourly wage work." His laugh was short and cruel. "We agreed on commission when you took the job. Don't try to rewrite history, Maddie. You signed that offer letter." "I did," I said calmly. "But employment agreements can't override labor law." That's what I confirmed, with a legal clinic. Now he was upright. Phone on the desk. Leaning forward. His expression shifted from smug to sharp. "You planning to sue me over this?" "I'm giving you the opportunity to resolve this privately." There was a beat of silence. Long, heavy. Then he stood. Slowly. Picked up my folder like it was contaminated and flipped through a few pages with disdain. "You kept all this?" he muttered. "Yes." "For what? Revenge?" "No," I said. "Respect." He threw the folder down with a scoff. "Not gonna happen. You're lucky you got a job here at all. You think you can take me down over a few hours parked in a Wendy's lot?" I looked him dead in the eye. "You just said the quiet part out loud." He stared at me like I'd grown 2 heads. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice to a hiss. "You're bluffing. You won't do anything. You're a broke single mom with no lawyer, no backup, and no clue how the real world works." I didn't flinch. I just picked up my check, stood up, and said, "Good luck proving that to the state labor board." I walked out of that office on shaking legs but with a spine of steel. My hands were trembling, my stomach churning, but under it all, a new emotion buzzed like electricity: control. The next few days were quiet. I cashed my check, started my new job, and waited. Not out of revenge, but because I knew the truth was on my side, and this wasn't personal. It was legal. That Monday, I made the call. The woman at the labor board, her name was Melissa, was kind, sharp, and very interested in what I had to say. I walked her through the parking lot assignments, the GPS tracking, the gas station surveillance, the screaming over idling engines. She asked for documentation. I sent everything, screenshots, logs, the folder I'd made. A week later, they called back. Melissa sounded almost giddy. "We've opened an investigation. You did everything right." I didn't tell anyone. Not even Alina. It wasn't about showboating. It was about justice. Then it started. First came the calls to former coworkers. Rick was scrambling, asking if anyone else had kept logs. What he didn't realize was how many of us had quietly hated the way we were treated. The labor board didn't just take my word, they interviewed 3 other drivers, all of whom confirmed the same treatment. Some had worse stories. One had been forced to work a 15-hour shift during a snowstorm with no breaks because Rick said the trucks were high demand that week. The board subpoenaed his time logs. They interviewed his assistant. They asked for proof of wage payments during idle assignments. Rick couldn't produce them. I didn't have to be there for the audit, but I heard about it. One of my old coworkers texted me, "Labor board's here. Rick's face looks like he's been hit by a truck." I smiled. Just a little. Then came the financial penalties. The board tallied up every hour of unpaid time, across 5 drivers, over 9 months. Thousands of hours. Thousands of dollars. Back pay, penalties, interest. Rick tried to fight it. He hired a lawyer. Tried to settle. But the numbers didn't lie. He sold 2 trucks to make the first payment. Then his office lot went up for sale. Then his boat. Then, finally, the entire business. Gone. Just like that. One phone call. I didn't get the full amount I was owed. Maybe 30% after all the claims were split and the state took its portion. But what I got was something deeper, vindication. I remember sitting in my living room weeks later, sipping coffee, watching Alina do her homework at the kitchen table. She looked up and said, "You're smiling." "I guess I am," I said. She grinned. "That's weird. It's not even payday." I didn't explain. I just watched her and thought, this is what justice feels like. The first sign that Rick's empire was cracking wasn't the trucks getting repoed. It was the silence. The man who once barked at employees over coffee lids and seat positions suddenly stopped showing up to morning dispatch. The once alive group text thread, where he used to berate us for minor infractions in all caps fury, went eerily quiet. Number 6 a.m. Where are you messages? No threats about lazy drivers burning fuel. Just nothing. And then the whispers started. Dan, one of the veteran drivers who had been with Rick for 6 years, texted me on a random Wednesday, "Labor board just pulled all the logs. Rick looks like he's aged 10 years in a day." I didn't reply. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because this wasn't about gloating. I'd spent enough nights crying into cheap wine and pretending I didn't hear Alina ask, "Are we gonna be okay?" I didn't want to become the villain in someone else's story. I just wanted accountability. And maybe, deep down, a little peace. But the cracks turned to craters. By the end of that week, the labor board had scheduled on-site interviews with every remaining driver. They were methodical, professional, but unrelenting. They pulled engine logs from the GPS software, cross-referenced them with Rick's own dispatch schedules, and flagged every instance where drivers had been stationary at a designated wait zone for more than 30 minutes without a tow, uncompensated. Every one of those minutes added up. 1. By 1. Rick tried to stall. Claimed his records had been lost in a system error. That his accountant misunderstood the structure. That all his drivers were on-call freelancers and not actual employees. But you can't lie to data. The transponder logs, which Rick had once used to punish us, had now turned into his executioner. The labor board wasn't there to chat, they were there to collect. Melissa, the case manager assigned to the investigation, called me for a follow-up. "Your documentation was some of the best we've seen," she said. "It filled in every blind spot. You practically wrote the audit report for us." I exhaled. For the first time in months, I felt air reach the bottom of my lungs. That weekend, the gossip hit social media. A former dispatcher, probably the only one with a conscience, posted a cryptic status on Facebook. Moral of the story? Don't treat people like they're disposable. They might just know the law better than you. It got over 200 comments. Most from people I didn't know. Some I did. Drivers, shop mechanics, even Rick's own niece, who once worked front desk before she mysteriously quit. By the time Monday rolled around, Rick's company was hemorrhaging money. He tried to offload the newer trucks on Craigslist, then Facebook Marketplace, then through a sketchy auction site. But word had already spread in the industry. No one wanted to buy from a man under state investigation. And still, he tried to act like nothing was happening. He walked into the office, wearing his signature too-tight polo and mirrored aviators, telling people it was just a misunderstanding. That it would blow over. That the board didn't have real proof. Meanwhile, Melissa had already filed the preliminary ruling, violation of wage laws across multiple counts, with restitution and penalties totaling over $290,000. Let that sink in. $290,000. For a man who used to scream at me about wasting 12 cents of gas. He tried to delay the payment. Filed for review. But it didn't stop the enforcement order. The state began asset evaluations immediately. They were relentless. His accountant quit. His lawyer ghosted him. His remaining employees walked out, one after another. Dan texted again. He just sold his boat. Cash. Looked like he was gonna cry. I pictured it, Rick standing on that dock, watching his pride and joy get hauled away by another man in flip-flops and a smug smile. That boat was his identity. He used to brag about it to clients, called it the Hook King. Said it was earned through hard work. What he never said was whose work earned it. By the third week, I stopped checking updates. I didn't need to anymore. It was already done. Alina and I went for a walk that Friday. She pointed at a beat-up tow truck parked in a vacant lot with a faded for sale sign taped to the window. "Isn't that one of your old trucks?" I looked closer. It was. Truck 11. My truck. I smiled. "Looks like it is." She tilted her head. "Are you sad?" I paused. Then shook my head. No. That truck always took care of me. It just never belonged to someone who deserved it. Later that night, I got a final email from Melissa, case closed. The company was officially marked dissolved. Rick Ballard no longer held any licenses to operate in the towing industry. Just like that, the man who controlled every move I made for almost a year was powerless. The irony? He was taken down by the very systems he used to manipulate us. GPS logs. Dispatch records. My soda can may have triggered his tantrum, but it was his ego that wrote his downfall. And all it took was a woman with a folder and a phone call. They say karma takes its time. But in Rick Ballard's case, karma showed up wearing a labor board badge, swinging a wrecking ball made of legal statutes, and it didn't knock, it kicked the door in. A month after my final check cleared and the case was closed, I heard the last piece of the story from an unexpected source, his ex-wife. Her name was Shelby, and I only knew her because she used to come into the office occasionally to drop off their teenage son or demand overdue alimony in front of everyone. Rick hated her the way weak men hate strong women. Loudly. Publicly. Constantly. But Shelby was a force of nature. Always had been. So when I ran into her at a hardware store, she worked there part-time, I nodded politely and kept it moving. But she stopped me. "You're Maddie, right?" I turned. "Yeah." She smirked. You're the one who took Rick down. I froze. I didn't take anyone down. I just filed a wage claim. She laughed. A real, belly-deep laugh that made the man behind her in the paint aisle look up. Oh honey, she said, tapping my shoulder with a smile, you filed the match. He poured the gasoline. We ended up sitting in her car for an hour. She told me everything, how he'd been skimming payroll taxes for years, how he used his employees' names to open lines of credit, how he tried to dodge child support payments by writing false pay stubs to make himself look broke. And then you show up, she said, shaking her head. With your paper trail and your receipts. And suddenly the whole Jenga tower collapses. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mostly I just felt numb. Like this entire saga had been a fever dream and I was finally waking up. But then she said something that stuck with me. You did what no judge ever could. You hit him where it hurt, his pride. His business was never about money. It was about power. And now? He's got none left. She told me he was living in a rental condo with broken blinds and a bad internet connection, working part-time as a dispatcher for another company, one that didn't let him touch the finances. Apparently, the owner only hired him because he wanted someone who knew what not to do. The poetic justice of that almost made me dizzy. But it didn't end there. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Thick, official-looking, from the Department of Labor. Inside was a final statement of restitution. It wasn't the full amount I was owed. Rick's assets had only covered a portion of the judgment, but it was more than I expected. Attached to the check was a typed note. Ms. Torres. *, we commend your thorough documentation and your persistence in seeking justice not only for yourself but for others. Your case will be used in future training for new investigators. Office of Wage and Hour Compliance. I read it 3 times. I sat there, in my tiny kitchen, holding that letter like it was the Pulitzer Prize. Because for a woman like me, no family name, no fancy degrees, no big law firm behind me, that piece of paper meant more than money ever could. It meant I mattered. The next day at work, I was quieter than usual. My new boss, Angela, noticed. You okay, Maddie? I nodded. Just processing. She smiled. Well, if you need anything, just say the word. And by the way, great job on that recovery last night. You made it look easy. Thanks, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. Because I wasn't surviving anymore. I was winning. That night, Alina and I curled up on the couch to watch a movie. I told her she could pick anything. She chose Erin Brockovich. About halfway through, she turned to me and whispered, "She kinda reminds me of you." I laughed, pulled her closer, and whispered back, "Let's hope you never need to be." But deep down, I was proud she saw it. Not the revenge. Not the paycheck. But the fight. The choice to rise instead of shrink. The choice to push back. Because that's what justice looks like. Not fireworks. Not headlines. Just one woman refusing to be silent. One folder. One phone call. And a company that thought it was untouchable, flattened like scrap metal on the side of the road. The lot where it all started was almost unrecognizable. Months had passed since Rick's business folded, and the once bustling dispatch yard now sat in eerie stillness, its cracked asphalt littered with broken glass, rusted bolts, and silence. The signage had been taken down. The gates hung off crooked hinges. Where there were once rows of trucks lined up like soldiers awaiting command, now there was nothing but oil stains and forgotten receipts fluttering in the breeze. It was a Saturday when I drove past it again, this time with no purpose other than curiosity. Alina was at a friend's house, and I had nowhere to be. The roads felt open, and my thoughts, unusually quiet. Maybe it was closure I was after, or maybe I just wanted to see the graveyard of a man's ego with my own eyes. As I rolled to a stop at the curb, I spotted it. The last tow truck. Truck 11. My truck. Still parked there like a loyal dog waiting for an owner who'd never return. I got out of the car slowly. The air smelled like sun-baked rubber and dust. I walked up to the old machine, scratched paint, flat tire, faded decal, and reached out to touch the door handle. It was cold, metal worn smooth from years of use. My fingers curled around it out of habit, like I'd never left. A wave of emotion hit me. This truck had seen me at my worst, sleep-deprived, crying after court hearings, racing through sleet storms, eating stale gas station muffins for breakfast. It had also seen me pull people out of ditches, help stranded mothers on the freeway, jumpstart the car of a crying teenager at midnight. I remembered one winter night when a man's car broke down outside a hospital. His wife was inside, in labor. I loaded him up, turned on the heater full blast, and floored it through the snow just to get him there in time. He made it. His daughter was born 10 minutes later. He named her Grace. That moment, and hundreds more, had nothing to do with Rick. Or money. Or lawsuits. They were mine. The truck didn't care who signed the paycheck. It had just done its job. Like I had. I looked inside. It was dusty, the seat cracked from sun exposure, the rearview mirror dangling slightly to the left. On the dashboard sat something that made me pause. A sticky note. Folded, yellowed, stuck to the surface like a ghost of the past. I opened the door and peeled it off. It read, "Asterisk if you're reading this, Maddie, I hope you won. You deserved to. Asterisk." It wasn't signed. I stared at it, stunned. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Maybe it was Dan. Maybe someone from the garage. Maybe a dispatcher who had watched everything unfold from the sidelines and finally saw me not just as the woman in truck 11, but as a person. I folded the note and slid it into my jacket pocket. Not as evidence. As a reminder. Walking back to my car, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd already reclaimed every part of that story that mattered. The lawsuit was over. The company was dead. The trauma was archived. But the lesson, that stayed. And here it is, in case someone else needs it more than I ever did. Know your worth. Even if no one else sees it yet. Document everything. Truth needs paper to stand on. Never mistake silence for defeat. Sometimes, it's the inhale before the scream. And above all, never underestimate what one person with a folder, a working brain, and a fierce sense of justice can do to a corrupt system built on arrogance and fear. You don't need to be rich. Or powerful. Or even particularly brave. You just need to be tired of waiting. Tired enough to stop asking permission. Tired enough to stop surviving and start acting. Because sometimes, revenge isn't a fiery explosion. It's a calm, calculated correction. And in my case, it only took one phone call. So if you're sitting there, holding your breath, second-guessing your right to speak up, stop. Make the call. Light the match. Let the empire fall.